that Democrats have won everything since 2016, 17 through 24. Every election in one way or another, they won because of an undercount. People talk about the Trump undercount. It's been the Democratic undercount that has come to the fray. And I think that's what will happen here. And here's the reason. The Haley vote, even when she was out of the race, she got 10 to 15%. Nikki Haley got 10 to 15% of the vote because not Trump among Republicans.
In exactly 4 weeks to the day, America will choose its next president, and the race is still too close to call. Donald Trump returned to the scene of the attempt to assassinate him with another rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, the swingiest of swing states. And Kamala Harris gave an interview to 60 Minutes. That's a long-running flagship show on the CBS network. Trump had very little new to say. He rarely does these days. And Harris was transparently trying to counter her reputation as a San Francisco liberal. Now that polls show she has trouble gelling with blue-collar workers in the blue wall states. Why, she even wanted us to know she has a gun.
I have a Glock, and I've had it for quite some time. And I mean, look, Bill, my background is in law enforcement. And so there you go.
Have you ever fired it?
Yes. Of course I have. At a shooting range. Yes, of course I have.
Phew, just a shooting range. That's good. Because she's surrounded by Secret Service now, so not quite sure she needs a gun. Harris was more assured than in previous interviews, but she struggled at times, especially when pushed on why illegal immigration had quadrupled in the first 2 to 3 years on the Biden-Harris watch.
It's a long-standing problem, and solutions are at hand. And from day one, literally, we have been offering solutions.
What I was asking was it a mistake to kind of allow that flood to happen in the first place?
I think the policies that we have been proposing are about fixing a problem, not promoting a problem. Okay?
But the numbers did quadruple.
And the numbers today, because of what we have done, we have cut the flow of illegal immigration by half.
Well, that was Kamala Harris on 60 Minutes. By American standards, it was a relatively robust interview. Donald Trump has declined to do a similar primetime interview with 60 Minutes. Let's get the latest analysis on the race from Sarah Elliott of Republicans Abroad UK and Bob Weiner, Director of Public Affairs in the White House under President Bill Clinton. Bob, let me come to you first. The Trump campaign seems, I think, stuck in something of a rut. And Harris seems to have found her feet to some degree. But she's not pulling away. Why?
Well, you're right, Andrew, and thank you for having me. I love being with you guys.
Thank you.
As you know, I've been to the top of your building, your gorgeous building overlooking all of London, the power of the London Times. Love what you guys
now you're talking.
With Times Radio. You're right. The latest Siena poll today has her 3 up, 49 to 46. But the polls are a razor's edge. The swing states are split. The presidency is within the margin of error. And the surge started from the beginning and seems to have tabled and plateaued somewhat. And we want to make sure that Harris does not just live on the laurels of the slight lead, because there could be a Trump undercount, but there could also be a Harris undercount, as there has been in every election for the Democrats since 2016. The Republicans lost in 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, the off-year elections, the presidential elections, because people just don't want Trump. It's not Trump is the issue, as many of the VIP and entertainer endorsers have made a point of saying. So we are hopeful. We are very hopeful. She is hopeful. She is the happy warrior. She is the female Franklin Roosevelt of campaigning in terms of the way that she goes about it. But I'm concerned that she swirls around a bit in terms of the way she explains things, and that she comes across a little bit whiny. So I'm just hopeful that all of that meshes in the right way, and that she continues her surge and brings everybody with. I think there's going to be a massive undercount against Trump, given the way that he's acted recently. His complaints against the Democrats are giving the money away in the hurricane. What an outrageous thing. And even all the governors have said that's outrageous.
Hold on, Bob. Hold on, Bob. We got to get Sarah.
I know we got
now.
a lot.
You've had a good run there. I thought Kamala Harris, I'm no doubt she's listening. She may be giving you a call to get some advice. Sarah, when will Trump say something new in this campaign? What about that health plan that he promised in the debate to replace Obamacare? Have we seen that yet?
Well, no, and that's always in the details. But what about Kamala Harris's economic plan? And she talks about price gouging.
I understand. No, I understand that. But you don't get to. You don't. When I ask you a question about your candidate, you don't get to talk about the other candidate. I just stopped Bob from doing that. There. Why will Trump? Why does he not say something new? I mean, I think even the cult, even those who go to these rallies, they're looking increasingly bored these days.
Well, I don't know about that. He just had Elon Musk at the Butler rally, and there were 25,000 people there. But he is Trump. Trump is not going to change. And I think that's why I think if you had the election today, it wouldn't be much different than if you had it a month from now. People's opinions on both candidates are pretty set in. People are giving Kamala Harris the benefit of the doubt, but every time she speaks, she doesn't utter a detail or a plan or any. She's just word salad. And so I don't think there's a lot of confidence in her. And with Trump, they know what they're getting. There's
which is no detail or no plan either. So maybe they're two sides of the same coin.
Will you guys quit with the no plan?
Bob?
Just quit with the no plan. $50,000 for small business startup, $25,000 for housing. She is coming in with specifics of her economics. She gave a whole speech on it.
Where is she getting that money?
Okay, I didn't interrupt you. Okay. And when he spoke to the New York Economic Club, he was an embarrassment. They couldn't get him to define that a tariff isn't a tax. So it's amazing that they keep saying no details. If you read the Democratic platform, there's a humongous number of details, and they're very specific. I made this point to London Times Radio earlier, that the day after the platform came out, she said there's no platform. There's a platform.
There is a platform, and I've read it, Bob, but let me ask you this. Harris boasted about how recent measures had cut illegal immigration. It's a vulnerable subject for the Democrats, given the numbers that have come across the southern border. She was asked why they hadn't been introduced 3 years ago and only now. She swerved the answer, Bob. So what is the answer?
The answer is, granted, it's become a big issue. Yes, Trump brought it up as an issue, but the solution was what the Democrats and the Republicans together did in the Senate of 1,500 more border agents and a lot more in a border bill that Trump said, kill it because it would give the Democrats an issue that something has happened. That's an outrageous way to govern.
No, Bob,
the way to govern is to get something done.
No. Hold on, Bob.
No.
That's a separate issue, and you're quite right that Mr. Biden did come up with a plan, and Mr. Trump was not too happy at a solution this side of the election.
Right.
But that's not the measures. That's not the measures that have just been recently introduced. They're all being done by the administration. They didn't need legislation. So I'll try one more time. I mean, the CBS guy failed, so I'll probably fail too. Why did they not introduce these measures when illegal immigration quadrupled in the first year of the administration?
Well, they did. They got Mexico to cooperate. That's one of the reasons why border crossings are way down by 2/3. People forget the actual achievements that have occurred.
Okay. All right. Let me bring Sarah back in now. Donald Trump seems to think that if he puts tariffs on Chinese exports to America, it's the Chinese that will pay them. Can we agree that, in Economics 101, that is just factually untrue? It's the importer that pays tariffs and then usually passes it on to the consumer. So in the end, the American people will pay the tariff.
I agree 100% with you. And I'm not in favor of the tariff talk. So I'm not going to defend it. But what I will say is that he will throw things out, kind of very exaggerated claims and things to start a deal. That's his kind of art of the deal. Start somewhere and work back.
That's a heck of a strategy to blow smoke and try to get it done.
And of
his
course, no politician's
strategy.
ever done that before, Bob. No politician's ever tried to blow smoke. But let me ask you this, Sarah. Will anybody senior, if Mr. Trump wins, will anybody senior be able to join a Trump administration that isn't prepared to say the 2020 election was stolen from him? I mean, that sounds like a kind of loyalty test you will have to pass to get a job in his administration.
It is. And I do think that that could very well happen. And that's because they do strongly believe that this might be, that 2020 was stolen. And so they want to make sure they have people who are philosophically aligned, that support their perspective and worldview. It's a very divisive issue in the Republican Party. Not all Republicans believe this. We saw this in the
You
primary.
don't believe it, do you?
I don't believe it, no.
Gee, you got a rational person here, Andrew. I'm impressed.
There are rational Republicans in the world.
We do our best, Bob. Let me come back to you. In the swing states, Trump is ahead in Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona. I take the most recent poll of polls there. Harris is ahead in Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada. Pennsylvania is a dead tie. And of course, there is no Democrat who's got into the White House since 1948 that didn't take Pennsylvania. And Sarah, I'll get you to comment on this after, is the leads for both Harris and Trump, they are tiny. They're well within the margin of error. They're like often less than 1%. They're 0.5%, 0.6%. So there's still all to play for. But what can change that between now and November the 5th?
Well, Andrew, it's a good point. By the way, I'm looking at 538's latest polls. Democrats up 1 in Pennsylvania. So you're 100% right. The state polls and the Senate polls are all at a razor's edge. But the point that I made at the beginning sticks, that Democrats have won everything since 2016, 17 through 24. Every election in one way or another, they won because of an undercount. People talk about the Trump undercount. It's been the Democratic undercount that has come to the fray. And I think that's what will happen here. And here's the reason. The Haley vote, even when she was out of the race, she got 10 to 15%. Nikki Haley got 10 to 15% of the vote because not Trump among Republicans. You're looking at people from Liz Cheney to Dick Cheney down to the lieutenant governor of Georgia and hundreds of Republican officials who are disgusted, former Trump national security officials, disgusted with Trump. That message has come through, and you're going to have a lot of Republicans sitting home or voting for Harris. And that is not something they will admit to the pollsters.
All right, but Sarah, let me come to you to respond to that.
Well, what I'd say is that Kamala Harris is behind Joe Biden at this stage of the game 4 years ago. And she is losing in all demographics except for women and white educated voters. So in all those other demographics, Joe Biden is doing better, even with blacks and Hispanics, than Kamala Harris is doing now. So that is definitely in favor for Donald Trump. I think that Kamala Harris should be much further ahead if she expects a win. And I think the more that Kamala Harris talks and is out in the media, that's what could turn the dial for this election and turn it in favor of Donald Trump.
Well, I got to say, Andrew.
Yep, on you go.
Okay. Kamala Harris, are you really going to play that game? It's Kamala, and you know it. And
are you really going to play that game, Bob?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. The same as people make fun of my name. I don't like people making fun of other names.
I'm not.
And by the way, Jay Leno said only in the Clinton sex case would there be a wiener testifying. So I'm used to people making fun of names. All right. So but here's the point.
Is it wiener or whiner, Bob? Just for my own
wiener.
use.
It's wiener, and I didn't correct you because I love you.
I misspoke at the start of the show.
But you're talking to Sarah. You're talking
to
to Sarah. You're
getting on so well together.
Let me just make the point that I didn't make. Okay. Which is, Sarah, you're talking about Biden. You're behind the curve. It's not Biden. And Harris has picked up plus 20 in the youth vote. She has picked up all the demographics that you talked about Biden not having. Guess what? The candidate isn't Biden.
No, I get it, but she should be doing better than Biden.
Chancellor Rachel Reeves hopes that a tweak to the fiscal rules, a redefinition of the national debt, and perhaps moving some borrowing like GB Energy off budget will release billions more for public investment. But the UK's long-term borrowing costs have climbed sharply in anticipation of this happening in her October 30th budget. On 10-year bonds, that's the government borrowing over 10 years, it now costs the UK government almost 2 percentage points more to borrow for that 10 years than it does the German government. The message from the bond markets, I think, is clear. Borrow more if you wish, Chancellor, but it's going to cost you more. The strong US economy is already forcing up global interest rates, which could easily translate into higher mortgage rates in the United Kingdom. So a lot hangs on Reeves getting the balance right. Let's delve into this with Simon French, Chief Economist at Panmure Liberum, an investment bank. He's also a Times columnist. Simon, is that broadly right, the message from the bond markets? If you want to borrow more, it's going to cost you more?
I think you're right in your diagnosis. What you've seen in recent sessions is the spread between, you mentioned the German Bund, but if you take the G7 average, the spread between the UK government borrowing for 10 years versus the G7 average has moved more to more than 100 basis points. Now, that happened a couple of times in recent economic history, obviously around the mini budget in September 2022, and then actually in the middle of 2023 when there were fears that the UK was going to feel a prolonged period of outsized inflation. But yes, I think the bond market is saying we don't really know the shape of the budget on the 30th of October, and there are some fears that additional issuance will be required to fund some of the spending plans, particularly on the capital side that Ms. Reeves is planning.
Because the context for this could be relevant, Simon, that the fiscal government budgets are stretched all over the place. The US government is running an eye-watering national debt at the moment and a federal deficit, and it's rising. The French fiscal position is even weaker than the British fiscal position. Is there a danger that the bond markets will just say, look, we're getting close to the limit of this government debt that you keep on issuing, and if you carry on doing it more, we're really just going to charge you a risk premium on it now?
Well, so I think let's put this in its context of a new UK government looking perhaps jealously at the debt-fueled expansion of the US economies over the last 4 years particularly. It's been dubbed Bidenomics. It has been all put on the US public sector balance sheet, and yes, a deficit of 7% of GDP out 10 years, which is what the Congressional Budget Office expect. It makes the UK fiscal stance, regardless of what happens to the budget, actually relatively conservative. I guess the question is whether the rules that face the world's biggest economy, tapping into the most liquid of bond markets, the treasury market, are just different to a medium-sized, albeit still a globally significant economy in the case of the UK. Running a dual deficit on the trade and the fiscal side does make you vulnerable to a change in sentiment in a way that I don't think people look at the US economy in the same way.
And of course, the US government borrows in dollars, and global investors always want to have a chunk of dollars in their investment portfolios, which isn't necessarily true of having to have sterling. So, I mean, politicians always try to make a difference. They say, oh, we're borrowing to invest. We're borrowing on infrastructure, good things, nice things, investment, improve productivity. We're not borrowing just to pay for current spending, though, of course, they do that as well. Does that make a difference to the bond markets? Do they care what you're borrowing for, or is it just the overall scale of the borrowing that matters?
No, they do care, and they should care. Look, over the course of the weekend, I think it was the Sunday Telegraph that ran a piece of Treasury analysis that suggested a unanticipated expansion of about £25 billion, about 1% of GDP, would, in the Treasury's view, lead to interest rates being 1.25% higher than in a scenario where they didn't borrow. And that analysis was released perhaps slightly politically after the mini budget, perhaps reinforcing the Treasury's view that it wasn't a very sensible approach to the public finances. I did sort of take to social media to challenge that analysis. Why? Because that was conditioned on quite a lot of that additional spending being current spending, where you can deploy it pretty quickly, either through public sector workers' salaries or through tax cuts. If you're doing it through capital, there is solid empirical evidence that you get more bang for your buck long term. Also, the pace at which you can deploy it. Anybody who's been involved with a capital spending project knows that it does take a number of years to deploy, and therefore the short-term inflation interest impulse should be lower. It's not that it's not inflationary. It's not that it doesn't have an upward impact on interest rates, but the magnitude is lower if you're investing in capital. And I think bond markets are sophisticated enough to realize that.
I understand. But if you've got a loan, if you're a small business with a loan or an individual with a loan, or you've got a mortgage that you needed to buy your house, is it true to say that the more the government borrows in the circumstances we're talking about, the greater the risk that there will be upward pressure on these interest rates that your loan was achieved at, and on the mortgage that you got?
Yes.
Well, that's a pretty clear answer. So that's something to look out for on the budget. So just finally on this, so it seems that the Chancellor can get away with tweaking her fiscal rules because they've been changed 9 times, seven times under a Tory government. That doesn't matter so much. But even if she does all this fiddling or jiggery-pokery or whatever you call it, she's still under some constraints. She just cannot borrow willy-nilly. The bond market will put constraints on her.
Yes, and I think this is where a single fiscal rule, be it a public sector net debt rule that either includes or excludes the Bank of England, or it moves to some form of a broader balance sheet definition looking at financial assets, which I think is the likely path. I think you also need to supplement these with a strategy for covering your current spending. And I think a supplementary rule that says that current spending, the type of stuff that we've seen allocate. Yeah, absolutely. That's probably the best example of current spending, that is covered by general taxation. Because if you are seen to borrow for current spending and you're manipulating your fiscal rules in order to facilitate that, then I do think it starts to chip away quite quickly your credibility with bond markets. And as a result, you face higher interest rates.
Simon, thank you for that. I hope we get a chance to speak to you again before the budget and during the budget. That was Simon French, Chief Economist at Panmure Liberum. The head of MI5 has just given a speech in which he says the security services have thwarted 43 late-stage terrorist plots bent on mass murder since 2017. On top of this domestic threat, he says Iran and Russia have embarked on a program of what he calls, quote, sustained mayhem in the UK. MI5 Director General Ken McCallum also says that in under 2 years, security forces have stopped 20 plots to endanger life by Iran alone. He said that lone individuals were being indoctrinated online and that they were getting younger. MI5, he said, and I quote him, had one hell of a job on its hands. Our political correspondent Theo Usherwood was at the speech. He joins me now. Theo, what was the purpose of this speech? What was the context in which, because the head of MI5 doesn't speak in public very often, why was he doing it today, this week?
So it's an annual update, good afternoon, Andrew, from Sir Ken McCallum. He does it every year to basically set out the security threat faced by this country. It didn't make an easy listen when we joined him at the Counter-Terrorism Operations Centre in London. Sir Ken said the security service had seen the number of state threat investigations shoot up by 48% in the last year. Particular focus in his speech on the Russians, saying that they're now concentrating their efforts on cyber attacks. That, of course, follows the expulsion of a number of Russian spies from the embassy. They're also employing criminals and private intelligence operatives to do their dirty work, Sir Ken said. And, of course, you mentioned the threat posed by the regime in Tehran. That's reached an unprecedented level, according to Sir Ken McCallum, with MI5 foiling 20 Iranian-backed plots since January 2022. And the concern here is, Andrew, that as events unfold in the Middle East, the regime in Tehran has upped the ante, like the Russians employing criminals to target their enemies of the government here in the UK. We haven't seen a large-scale terrorist attack on these shores as a result of the events in the Middle East over the last year or so, although Sir Ken McCallum was very clear that it is perfectly possible going forward.
It seems that MI5 is now fighting on, and the other security services, it's not just MI5, the other security services that work with MI5, including the police. It seems though they're fighting, Theo, on multiple fronts. They've got to deal with actual organised terrorist attacks, plots being made that resulted, originally we saw it on this country with the London Underground and the bus bombs. They've got a deal, he seemed to highlight, with lone individuals who are being indoctrinated online. And he seemed to imply these are harder to deal with because, how do you know who the lone individual is? They're not like they're a cell plotting to do things. And now the arrival of malign state actors in the form of Russia and Iran. It's a lot of thumbs needed to keep you plugging these holes in the wall, isn't there?
It's very difficult, and Sir Ken was very honest about this. He wouldn't be drawn in terms of funding negotiations with the Treasury, but he did admit, Andrew, the bar at which officers decide to investigate continues to rise. Of course, leaving off lower level threats or threats that are perceived at being a lower level, which of course could turn out to be more significant in future. But Sir Ken was very honest that he simply didn't have the resources at his disposal to investigate every single lead that comes across his desk or the desk of his officers. He was also very forthright when it came to ensuring his officers had access to encrypted messaging services like WhatsApp, saying that it was perfectly possible to balance an individual's right to privacy with the necessity of MI5 to have access to platforms like WhatsApp and Telegram to prevent them from doing so would give terrorists and child abusers, he said, the opportunity to operate at scale without the fear of any consequences.
What do you think will be the main? Because there was a lot in the speech and a lot of figures, and some, as you began by saying, some of it quite worrying, not an easy listen. What do you think the main takeaway will be from what the head of MI5 had to tell us today?
I think the main takeaway will be, of course, the threat of state actors like Russia, like Iran. And he toned down his rhetoric, I should mention, when it came to China. Previously, I was at the same briefing at the back end of 2022, and he lumped China in very much in the same basket as Iran and Russia. But this time, he said it was a more complicated picture for the government as ministers tried to build economic relations with the Chinese government, but at the same time not compromising national security. And he was talking more in terms of the need for the MI5 to advise universities and businesses in this country when it came to engaging safely with China without compromising themselves or, of course, our own security. And one other statistic to jump out, and it's an astonishing one. 1 in 8 of all cases investigated by MI5 now involves a minor, somebody under the age of 18. That's up threefold in the last 3 years, something Sir Ken said he could not have envisaged when he started his career as a spook, and then primarily relate to cases of the far-right extremism with children being radicalised online in their bedrooms through the dark recesses of the internet.
Indeed, that 1 in 8 figure of youngsters being involved jumped out at me too, Theo. Thank you for that, and dashing back from the speech to be with us, Theo Usherwood there on a somewhat scary speech by the head of MI5 today. Coming up, mayhem in the UK isn't the only threat posed by Iran. The regime is thought to be close to making its own nuclear weapons. We'll explore that here next on Time Radio.
This afternoon from 2 on Times Radio.
My guest is the brilliant and vastly experienced Channel 4 foreign correspondent Lindsay Hilson. She'll talk about the places she's been, the people she's met, and her new book, I Brought the War With Me.
This afternoon from 2 on Times Radio.
That was the bomb that still makes Ken jump, that keeps him awake at night, that he can't stop thinking about, that scares his wife, upsets his kids, that ruined his life. The bomb exploded in Iraq 20 years ago. For many, the battle continues. Combat Stress provides intensive mental health treatment to UK veterans with complex mental health problems. Combat Stress, for veterans' mental health. To find out more, go to combatstress.org.uk.
Discover awe-inspiring Antarctica with HX Hurtigruten Expeditions. Come kayak through the icy landscape and see penguin colonies and humpback whales up close on this all-inclusive adventure. Book now to save up to 20% on selected trips, backed by our price promise. Search Travel HX to find your 2025-26 expedition cruise. Conditions apply. HX. Change the way you see the world.
Nothing tastes better than a free mini McFlurry.
Free? Oh.
I just signed up for rewards on the McDonald's app.
I bet it tastes better when it's free.
Go on then, have the rest.
Sign up on the My McDonald's Rewards and get a free mini McFlurry and 1,000 points when you place your first order. 18 plus, only via app at participating restaurants. Register by the 20th of October and order within 14 days. Minimum spend required. Terms apply.
Download the free Times Radio app from the App Store or Google Play today. Andrew Neil on Times Radio.
The world is still waiting for Israel to retaliate against Iran for last week's ballistic missile attack. Delay should not be seen as cold feet. Some are urging Israel to strike at Iran's nuclear facilities, where it's developing a nuclear arsenal. So, should Israel hit them? Does Israel have the ability to set them back months, if not years, if it does? Let's speak to Jason Brodsky, political director of United Against Nuclear, a think tank in the United States. Jason Brodsky, thank you for joining me. Let me begin by asking you this. How close, in your view, is Iran to being able to make nuclear bombs and deliver them by ballistic missiles?
Well, it's great to be with you. And I would say that Iran is very close to breakout. Right now, breakout time is probably around 0 to create enough fuel for a nuclear weapon. But then you need to create the weaponization package and the delivery vehicle for that nuclear device. And that would take anywhere from several months to a year more. So that's really the timeline that we're working under right now.
I see. So what is missing is not some, because I know it is refining uranium way beyond what could be needed for any peaceful use. But what would be missing more than the ability to put the bomb together is the delivery system that it would need to have to.
Yes, that's all part of the package here. There is, though, a concern that Iran can use a crude nuclear device, and that is something that I know that policymakers have been eyeing very warily, given the 60% enriched uranium, which is unprecedented for a non-nuclear weapons state.
Well, what do you mean by a crude bomb? You mean it could just sort of drive in with a dirty bomb, just kind of leave it in a city center or something like that?
Yes, that is a concern, and so that's something that I know the international community has been quite worried about.
If Iran had its own nuclear weapons, particularly ones that it could stick on the top of ballistic missiles, wouldn't that change the balance of power in the region, in the Middle East region, hugely in Iran's favor?
Yes, it would, and it would result in a proliferation cascade for the other states in the region, and that is why Iran can never be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon. I think that what we have is a state that, as we saw recently, is not shy of attacking Israel with the largest ballistic missile attack ever against Israel from Iran since 1979. And so if it had nuclear weapons, that definitely opens up a number of concerns with respect to Israel, especially when a regime like the Islamic Republic has as one of its central foreign policy pillars the eradication of the state of Israel.
If it became public knowledge or became established that Iran had become a nuclear weapons power, you mentioned the reaction of others. What would the reactions be, for example, of the Arab Gulf states? Let's take Saudi Arabia as the biggest one. Would there not be a risk that it would rush to Pakistan to buy the bombs and missiles of its own off the shelf from Pakistan?
Absolutely. And the Saudi leadership has said that if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, that it will have to do so as well. So this is why the United States and its allies have been trying to deter the Islamic Republic from getting to that point. But the concern has been that the Islamic Republic has been advancing its nuclear program since 2021, cost-free, without the international community, meaning the United States and its allies, really credibly deterring these advancements. And that has been why there's been tremendous alarm when Iran reached 60% enrichment. And there has been no price that the Islamic Republic has paid for that kind of advancement.
So the scary prospect here, if you're looking in from the outside, is that a part of the globe in which the world still relies for much of its oil supplies, and which you could have a nuclear-armed Iran and a nuclear-armed Saudi Arabia, and so on. I mean, that would be hugely destabilizing and risky in such a crucial part of the world.
Yes, and I also think that we have to look at the way the Islamic Republic operates through its terror proxies and partners, and that would increase the risk readiness on the part of the regime to even destabilize the Middle East even more. So that is why this is all a great concern and should be at the top of the agenda with respect to the Islamic Republic.
Let me ask you this then, Mr. Brodsky. Does Israel, if it is so minded, does Israel have the capabilities to destroy or at least seriously degrade Iran's nuclear facilities? Does it have planes with the range that can carry the necessary payload?
I would say Israel has the ability to damage the Islamic Republic's nuclear program, but it would need the assistance of the United States to completely collapse the nuclear program, and especially with respect to the dispersal of the facilities that Israel would have to hit throughout Iran. And so
because they're spread all over the place.
Exactly. And also they're in hardened mountainous bunkers as well. And the United States has those advanced armaments that Israel does not have to the extent that the United States contains in its arsenal to take out those kinds of hardened facilities. So yes, Israel has the ability to damage the nuclear program, but the United States has the ability to really shatter and totally collapse the program.
I understand the difference that Israel on its own might be able to delay or hold up or make life difficult, but you would need America to be involved to really make a major difference. Can I ask you then, it follows, then, why is President Biden so insistent that Israel should not attack Iran's nuclear facilities? I mean, many might think, look, if Israel's going to retaliate, then surely the nuclear facilities are the most likely thing to attack. This would be the best thing to attack.
Right. That is the one of the most pressing U.S. national security concerns. Unfortunately, I think the Biden administration has been paralyzed by a fear of escalation with respect to the Islamic Republic, and that short-term fear and risk aversion is really confounding and detracting from long-term strategic thinking as to the opportunity that Israel has right now to set back the nuclear program. Because let's not forget, externally, the Islamic Republic has never been weaker. Israel has seriously degraded Hezbollah, which is its crown jewel among its terror proxies. And Hezbollah was always supposed to be the deterrent for the Islamic Republic against an Israeli strike on its nuclear program. Now, with the leadership of Hezbollah effectively decapitated and Hamas's military capabilities decimated, this is a real opportunity for Israel and its allies to set back the nuclear program. And so that's why it is rather curious that the Biden administration, and I think in a very misguided way, seems to be dodging from this opportunity to set back the program.
Well, you clearly think that Israel should proceed. You prefer American help. But if that's not forthcoming, I think you're saying that Israel should have a go. Anyway, let me finish by asking you this, though. What is the danger if these nuclear facilities are bombed from the air in bunker buster type bombs and so on, that it unleashes a radioactive cloud in the region?
Well, I think that there is obviously a risk there, but I think the United States and Israel have measures to guard against that as well. And so I would hope that would be factored into any military planning with respect to these kinds of facilities. But let's understand—
How would you guard against it? How would you guard against it?
Well, I think that that's a question for the U.S. military. But what I would say is that there are a lot of facilities, not just nuclear, that Israel would be considering going after. There are ballistic missile sites. There are command and control sites. There are Iranian leadership sites. There are also a whole range of military bases as well. So it's not just bombing the nuclear program or not bombing the nuclear program. There are a variety of other sites that I think would be very meaningful to the U.S. and its allies, particularly the UK as well, because let's not forget that Iran is supplying missiles and drones to Russia for use against Ukraine. And if Israel were to take out some of the defense industrial bases that Iran uses to manufacture those missiles and drones, I think that that would be quite welcome in the war effort in Ukraine.
Jason Brodsky, thank you for joining us from the United States today. There's much loose talk about all-out war between Israel and Iran. Nobody can really tell us what that would look like. In the event of wider hostilities, who would side with whom in the region? Let's speak to William Patey, former UK ambassador to Afghanistan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia and Sudan. Welcome to the programme. Thank you for joining me here. Let me start with this question. If there was a wider war between Iran and Israel, wouldn't Iran be somewhat isolated? The Arab Gulf states would either sit on their hands or probably furtively side with Israel.
Well, they would certainly not want to get sucked into the war. I think Iran would be able to rely on Russia for supplies and maybe indirect support. They could expect the North Koreans and perhaps even the Chinese surreptitiously to support them. I think certainly the Gulf states would want to stay out of it. So Iran wouldn't necessarily be isolated. I think they would lose, but there would be no guarantee that a war between Israel and Iran wouldn't spread, because Iran might decide to attack US bases in the Gulf region.
No, I understand that, and that would be the danger that could creep across the region. But I would have thought that Russia may have enough on its hands and need all the rockets it's got and military material for Ukraine. And I think, as a former ambassador, you'll be able to tell me this. Even the Taliban in Afghanistan are not best pals with the regime in Tehran, are they?
No, certainly not. They have sectarian religious differences. The Taliban are an extreme fundamentalist Sunni group, and Iran, of course, is run by the Shia revolutionaries. So, I mean, I'm not suggesting that Iran is in a good place to fight a war.
I understand that.
But it would certainly not be alone.
If Israel was to succeed in taking out Iran's nuclear facilities, and we heard before the break that that's easier said than done, particularly if the Americans are not going to help. But if they were to succeed to do that, wouldn't the Saudis and the UAE, to just pick two examples, be the happiest folk in the region?
Certainly. The Saudis and the UAE do not want Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. I think they would probably take the view that it's unlikely that you could take out Iran's nuclear facilities from the. As someone who's been ambassador in Afghanistan and Iraq, I have seen the limitations of air power in achieving specific objectives on the ground. So they certainly have no interest in Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon, but the consequences of trying to take out Iran's nuclear facilities would mean such a devastating assault that would be all-out war, I think.
Yes. What do you see if the consequence? We don't know if Israel is going to do this. It's got other targets it could go for in retaliation. But if it was to attack the nuclear facilities, and of course there's many of them, they're spread all over the country, it may go for the infrastructure that supports the bomb making rather than the bomb factories themselves. What do you think would the consequences be? How would Iran react to that?
Well, I think they would. Fire, their arsenal of weapons at Israel. They would certainly want to retaliate against Israel. They would want to use their proxies. So we could expect Hezbollah to unleash what has remained of its rocket arsenal. We might even see the Syrian regime being sucked in, and their allies in Iraq, their allies and militias in Iraq getting involved. The Houthis in the Red Sea. We could see the Red Sea closed completely, and we might even see certainly in the short term the Straits of Hormuz closed. So the implications for oil prices for the rest of the world would be quite profound. Even if a war was to remain limited and without outside powers being sucked in, which would be highly dubious that could remain the case.
You mentioned the Straits of Hormuz, and I'm glad you did, because I wanted to ask you about that. Because perhaps a bigger danger is that Israel tries to take out the Iranian oil export facilities on Karg Island. It's where most of oil is exported from. And then Iran retaliates to hit Saudi facilities. It's tried to do that before. That could lead to a repeat of the soaring oil prices that previous Middle East crises, but not this one, 73 and 79, have done. I wanted to ask you this. Does Iran, in your view, have the ability to close the Straits of Hormuz, through which so much of the world's oil still flows?
Yes, I think they do. They could create a situation which it would be impossible for ships to transit the Straits of Hormuz. Look how easy it has been for the Houthis to limit the passage of shipping through the Mandab, the Bab el-Mandab, the straits there. Equally, Iran sits right opposite the Straits of Hormuz. It's a very narrow international waterway. It would not be difficult through terrorist means, planting of mines, fast attack boats to at least convince shipping that it would only have to blow up a couple of tankers to close the strait. So they certainly have the capacity if they'd want to do it. Of course, it would affect them, of course, because they rely on the Straits of Hormuz to export their oil to China.
No, I can see the shipping insurers not being too keen about letting the boats go through in these circumstances, the ships go through. Of course, one constraint may be that most Iranian oil these days goes to China, and Tehran might not be keen to cut off supplies to a fellow member of the Axis of Resistance.
Yes, Iran would not have lots of good decisions. They'd be choosing the least bad options, and it would depend how threatened they were and how existential that threat was. If a threat from Israel became existential to the regime, you could expect all bets to be off, and they would rather bring the house down around them. But if it was limited, they'd have to calculate their options. So you've got a old and sclerotic leadership in Iran that may not have a very good understanding of the geopolitics of the calculations of other leaders. So the possibility of miscalculation is quite high.
I want to finish with one question, because you were, among other countries, our ambassador in Sudan. There's been talk as part of a ceasefire deal in Gaza of one of the few remaining Hamas leaders, Yahya Sinwar, going in with his family into voluntary exile in Sudan as part of an overall ceasefire deal. Would Sudan itself be up for that?
Well, it's hard to see Sinwar being up for it, given the complexity.
Well, I think that's true.
But I suspect they might be. I'm not quite sure where he would reside, because the government doesn't have control over the whole place. I doubt the RSF, he would be happy with the militias taking him. But it's something that Egypt has a lot of influence in Sudan, a lot of influence with the Sudanese armed forces, the military government, if you like. So I suppose Egypt could be instrumental in doing that, but I can't see why Sinwar would want it.
No, I agree with you there. I understand. William Petty, thank you for joining us. It's been good to talk to you this afternoon. That's our former ambassador in 4 countries in the region that we've been discussing.